Thank you, Brother Andrew, and good morning to everybody. I could not help but think, as that worship set was going on, that I do so wish that the man we're going to be reading about in today's story could have been with us here today for worship, because I think he would have particularly appreciated that third song that we sang. I think he would have belted his heart out to that line. Through every trial, my heart will sing, no turning back, I've been set free. I think that whole song, I've decided to follow Jesus, no turning back, I think all of that would have just resonated with this guy that we're about to be reading about this morning. So I truly appreciate that, and I appreciate you for being here today. I think we're going to have a lot of fun today. This is a fun little text. It's one that I've been just really noodling over all week, and I'm just digging it. I mean, I dig every text that we do, but this one just, to me, was just a really, really fun text to look at. If last week's sermon was the marathon, and at 56 minutes on YouTube, it was the marathon. If last week's sermon was the marathon, then today's the victory lap. Today's the victory lap, and if you hopefully you even know what that is, a victory lap. Maybe not all of us have won a race, but when somebody's running a race and they win, a lot of times they'll take that one extra little lap around the track, just kind of celebrating and soaking in and basking in the fact that they just won this great victory. And the funny thing is they've already been running. They're probably tired, right? They're like, oh, but that victory lap, it's like you just got a whole new second wind, or in some cases a third wind, and you're running around that track and just kind of basking in it. And what I think is awesome about the victory lap is it's the same motions, but it's different. It's a little more relaxed. It's a little more peaceful. You're not gunning as hard as you can, trying to win a race, because you've already won it. And so if last week was the sermon, today's the victory lap. Last week, during the conclusion of that sermon, we talked about how we find our peace in Jesus and we do not find our peace in this world. That was the whole big encapsulation of it, because ultimately the world will reject us. Ultimately, the world will resist us. Ultimately, the world will not want anything we have to say, but because we are standing with Jesus. We are standing for Jesus. But again, Jesus has overcome the world. That was the whole deal last week. And as we continue our journey through the Gospel of John, today's story illustrates that very point that last week's story led up to. So I'm looking at today's story almost as an illustration of everything we talked about last week there in that conclusion, about how Jesus overcame the world and how we get to share that victory with him. We're going to read about a man today who was born blind. He never saw anything a day in his life until he met Jesus, and who, like we talked about last week, he finds his peace in Jesus. He finds his security in Jesus. It gives him tremendous resolve, as we'll see. He overcomes a terrible ordeal, and he actually comes out the other side better than he went in. He comes out the better side. He comes out the other side far better off than he would have come out had he never met Jesus in the first place. And so after that, after all of this goes on, he takes a little victory lap in a pool. He takes a little victory. Jesus says, go take you a victory lap. Go wash off in the pool. And he goes and he does that. And it's also an illustration of Jesus being the light of the world. We talked about that last week. Jesus is going to repeat that phrase this week. And that's something else that we discussed, that we just need to remember, that he's the light of the world. In granting sight to this man, he makes it possible for him to see. And that is something that light does. But what I want to stress, because this is a fun story, it has a great happy ending, but what I want to stress is this man's life was not easy. It took a lot of pain and tears and ordeal to get to where he got. His life was not, even though it ended well, his life was not easy. He was born with this debilitating physical condition, congenital blindness, like blindness from birth, never ever being able to see anything. He's born in this condition. He endured hardships. He endured rejection. He was forced to just live a life of a beggar, just begging for food, begging for money, begging for scraps. That was his life until he met Jesus. He suffered abuse and he suffered persecution in his faith when he did meet Jesus and he began following Jesus. This man's life was not easy, but we see what's going to happen to him by the end of the story. And his life ultimately reminds us that one day we too, who truly belong to Jesus and truly follow him, we get to run a victory lap. We get to see that same kind of reversal of fortune play out for us. And so today I want to give you 3 insights of what we get to look forward to when we take our victory lap at the end of this life. 3 insights about our victory lap. So if you have not done so already, please join with me. Flip in your Bibles with me to the Gospel of John, chapter 9. We're going to be reading through this entire chapter today, but we're going to break it up into 3 chunks. Our first reading is going to be verses 1 through 12, and then we're going to pause for our first insight. So if you're there, if you're with me, let's go ahead and read the word of the Lord, John chapter 9, verses 1 through 12. Here's what it has to say to us today. As he being Jesus, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, Is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some said, It is he. Others said, No, but he is like him. He kept saying, I am the man. So they said to him, Then how were your eyes opened? He answered, The man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, Go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, Where is he? He said, I do not know. So we pause there. The first insight for our victory lap, the first insight for your victory lap this morning is this. Every ailment has its place. Every ailment has its place. And all of my kind of main breakouts today are going to have a little subpoint that goes with them. Every ailment has its place. And here's the subpoint. We don't need to know the cause or to fix the blame for our misfortunes. We don't need to know all the causes. We don't need to fix the blame for all of our misfortunes. Every ailment has its place. Let me explain, because I don't want to make light of this. I don't want to make light of this. But we have this tendency, when we go through hard times, to start screaming, why? Why is this happening to me? Why am I going through this? Why now? Why this? Why am I suffering? Or what about this one? Why is God letting this happen to me? Why is he allowing this to happen to me right now? We have this tendency to start asking these questions. And what we're doing, anytime you're asking the question why, what we're doing is we're looking for a cause. If we could just have some explanation of what is causing this, or even to fix blame for it. We could be asking for the cause just to know, or we could be looking for someone or something to blame. But that is like typically the first thing we want to do whenever we go through anything we don't like, any type of hardship, anything that stretches us or upsets us or causes us any kind of pain or grief or anything like that. We want a cause, and we want to know who to blame or what to blame. And sometimes when we start asking those questions, there's a hidden assumption kind of buried in there. There's just this hidden assumption that God should remove that hardship from us. That he should just remove it. Or at the very least, that he owes us an explanation. He needs to tell us exactly why he's allowing this to happen. And so we'll start praying and either take it away or at least tell me why. And if he doesn't take it away, he better at least tell me why. And if he doesn't tell me why, I might start to even get a little angry and that kind of thing. And we start doing this. We think he needs to answer for himself about why he's letting this happen. And so we sit there and we kind of stew over these things. Well, listen, if you're reading The Purpose-Driven Life with us, and you're coming to the study tonight, which hopefully, almost everybody in here is going to be at that. If you're reading The Purpose-Driven Life with us, then we were reading about this week. You know this already, that we've already been reading about this kind of thing. Rick Warren on day 22, you'll remember this. He made the point that God's ultimate goal for your life on earth is not comfort, but character development. You remember that? Not comfort, but character development. That is far more important to God than our personal comfort. And on day 25, he reminded us, he said this, we learn things about God in suffering that we can't learn any other way. We learn things about God in suffering that we cannot learn. There are things we will never understand about God unless we have walked through trials, tribulations, and suffering. And this quote behind me, also from day 25. Listen to this. Your most profound and intimate experiences of worship will likely be in your darkest days. When your heart is broken, when you feel abandoned, when you're out of options, when the pain is great, and you turn to God alone. I've experienced that. Let me just be clear. I agree with that statement. Some of my most profound encounters with God have been when I could barely contain myself and my emotions. When I was so upset, I could hardly keep a coherent thought in my head. I've had some of the best encounters with God. I agree with that quote wholeheartedly. And if you come to the study tonight, we're going to be talking a whole lot more about how God uses all of the experiences of our lives, not just the suffering, but all of them, to grow us more and more into the image and the character of his son, Jesus. That's one of the purposes of our life. But here's the kicker. We're all reading Purpose-Driven Life, or at least most of us have. We like it. It's fun. It's a great little book. But, reading that we need hardships in our lives is sure a lot easier than actually walking through those hardships. Am I right? Yeah, we can all shake and nod when we're reading about hardships and God working through hardships to redeem us and all these things. So it's easy to read about, but man, then when it happens, whoops, suddenly it's not so fun. The reason I know this, we can do a little social experiment here. The reason I know this is because you were probably agreeing with everything I've been saying up to this point. You're like, yeah, I agree with that quote. I agree with all that stuff. But you still cringed a little bit in verse 3 when Jesus said, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. You still cringed a little bit when you heard that line. And so that's how I know. That's how I know. Some part of you may have been like, well, that's not fair. That's not fair. This guy's blind from birth. That's not fair. You see, theology, even a theology of suffering, it's all fun and games until the theology jumps out of the theology book and lands in our lap and then forces us to live with it. Theology is fun when it's just something we're learning about on paper. But then when we have to endure it, suddenly theology is not quite so much fun. And I'm not belaboring or belittling anybody in here. I'm just making a point. We can read things all day and say we agree with this, but like 5 seconds from now, we could go walk out that door and encounter the very thing we just read about and said, amen, brother, encounter the exact same thing and do the exact opposite and not even see that we're completely contradicting what we said we believed 5 seconds ago. And we all do this. We're so good at this as human beings, of compartmentalizing our lives and splitting our so-called beliefs from our actions and then living in a way completely contrary to what we just said we believed a few seconds ago. But just to be clear, Jesus was not saying that God caused this man's blindness. We do need to be clear about that. That was not Jesus' point. Jesus was rather saying that God was going to use the blindness as an opportunity to show his greatness. God didn't make this man be born blind just so that, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, God can show off. But rather that in this man's weakness and tribulation, God was going to use this as an opportunity to not only do a great thing for the man, but to show how great he is to the world. That's what Jesus was actually saying. And we'll see by the end of the story, this guy ends up far better off than he would have been otherwise if he had never met Jesus in the first place. If he had been born with his eyesight and lived a full life physically with his eyesight, but walked the same path as most of his peers that we've been reading about, he would have been far worse off. So yeah, he endured this trial for a while, but he ends up far better off than he would have been otherwise. But the reason Jesus even spoke about this at all, the reason Jesus had to even address this at all was because of that question they asked him in verse 2. Did you see that question? Verse 3 makes us want to cringe, but verse 2 is the verse that should make us cringe. We read right past verse 2. Verse 3 is like, ooh, what do you mean God is going to, this is for God's greatness? No, verse 2 is the one that should make us cringe. They said, who sinned? This man or his parents? They're walking past this guy. He's blind. He's a beggar. And they're like, who sinned? This man or his parents? That's the line that should make us cringe. This guy that was born blind, as if he could have sinned before he was born, that his blindness would be a result of his own sin. So that's weird enough, but they just made this fundamental assumption. They just made this very fundamental assumption that all of our misfortunes and all these bad things we go through are directly a result of some sin that we've committed. They just made this really weird assumption there that, well, he's blind. Think of Job in the book of Job, his so-called friends, these people that are supposedly coming to show him love and support. They're like, dude, you messed up big. Whatever happened, you sinned against God. You better confess. And Job keeps saying, I didn't do anything. I don't know what you're talking about. And they're like, nope, you definitely sinned. But we see this assumption kind of woven through the Bible, and we see it still today, that if something bad happens to you, you must have sinned. If you got sick, you must have sinned. If you went through a hardship, you must have sinned. That there's a sin that's responsible for that. And Jesus wants them to know that this is not a good assumption. Jesus wants them to know that this is actually very, very false. It's false. It is a false equivocation. Now, to be fair, a lot of the misfortunes that we do suffer are a direct result of our own sins. And we need to be on board. We need to understand that. We need to get a grip on that. We need to face that. A lot of the misfortunes that we suffer in our own lives can be attributed in some way, shape, or form to some sin that we have committed. And that is absolutely the case. A lot of times we bring a lot of we can say all we want, it's Satan attacking me, but a lot of times we brought it on ourselves. That is a fact. But not all of it. Not every time. The fact is, we live in this broken, sinful world where things happen. And God nowhere promises us that if we're just really, really good and we obey him all the time, nothing's ever going to happen to us. He never makes that promise. In fact, last week we read Jesus explicitly saying the opposite. We read that verse last week where Jesus said, in this world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. He said we will have tribulation. So yes, a lot of our sin comes back on us. That's true. But it is not always the case. It's not a one for one. If you're always good, then only good will happen to you. And if you're bad, then only bad will happen to you. It's not a one for one like that. But in this man's case, his misfortune was for his glory and the glory of God. But his misfortune was actually a good thing. His physical blindness will lead directly to him not only getting physical sight restored, but to his spiritual eyes being opened, his spiritual blindness being cured. Jesus is going to heal his blindness twice in this passage. And he's far better off in the long run. But this is what I want you to really, really zone in on right here, is that when they pushed this question on Jesus, who sinned, when they started asking, what's the cause, what's to blame, remember the point on the screen? When they started asking that question, notice Jesus When they're trying to put the focus on the cause and the blame, Jesus shifted the focus away from that. Notice Jesus did not play that game. He shifted the focus away from that to what God could do in the midst of that misfortune. Jesus wasn't interested in the cause or the blame. He was interested in what is God going to do with it. And that is a key distinction to make. And that is why my first insight for your victory lap is that every ailment has its place, and we don't need to know the cause or to fix the blame for every single misfortune. We don't. Spiritual maturity, true spiritual maturity, is when we learn how to stop saying, God, why is this happening to me? And start saying, God, what can I learn from this? Or even better, stop saying, God, why are you letting me endure this? And start saying, God, how are you going to use this for your glory? When we can stop asking those other questions and start asking how God's going to be glorified in this or what God's going to do in this, that is when we know we're growing. That is when we know we're getting that perspective. And I know a bunch of you right now, you've been putting up with everything I've been saying, but what you really want to know is what in the world is up with Jesus spitting in the mud and making a mud cake with his spit, right? That's what everybody really wants to know. Well, I always wondered that too. And so we have to address this before we move on, because this to me, I think, is one of the coolest aspects of this whole story, is why did Jesus do this? After all, I mean, think about it. We have all these stories in the Bible where Jesus heals people. In John chapter 5, Jesus healed that paralyzed man, and all he did was say, get up. He didn't touch him. He didn't spit on him and rub mud on his legs. He just said, get up. And the guy got up. So why, in this instance, is Jesus spitting on the ground, making mud cakes, and shoving it in the guy's face? And that's just always something that I always wondered. And just, you have these theological questions in the back of your mind, and, one day I'll get an answer to that. Well, this actually came up when I was taking Hebrew 2 at seminary, in Hebrew class one day. For somehow this story came up, and we were discussing it, and it's actually really cool when you think about it. First of all, the Bible doesn't tell us exactly. Like, it doesn't give us an explanation, but here's the best explanation I've ever heard. Think back to the book of Genesis. Think back to when God first created man, and he had just finished creating out of nothing, right? And he forms this man out of what? Out of the dust of the earth, out of the mud of the earth. God forms this man, creates this man where before there was no man. He forms him, and then he breathes his breath into him. He breathes his spirit into him. He exhales his essence into this lump of clay and gives life to this man. And now there's life where before there was no life. He created life from non-life. And so the best explanation I've ever heard is that this is a throwback to that event, because the difference with this man and all the other healings in the Gospels is that this is the only recorded example of a person who was actually born blind getting his sight. Jesus heals blind people, he heals sick people, but he's always, think about it, he's always fixing something that was broken. This paralyzed man can't walk, he fixes his legs. This other blind man who used to be able to see, but he can't see, he heals his eyes. This demon-possessed man who used to be okay, he cast the demon out. There's this, he's always fixing something that was working, but this man has never had working eyes in his life. This man has never had eyesight. So in a sense, God is creating something from nothing. He is creating something where there was nothing there before. And so he does what he does when he creates from nothing. He forms it out of the mud. And in an allusion to the book of Genesis, he reaches down, he takes this mud, he spits in it, which, think again of God breathing his spirit into the mud, putting his essence into the mud. There was this belief that saliva had medicinal properties in the ancient days, and it's also Jesus' saliva. So he makes this mud and puts his essence into it, and boom, creates something from nothing. Sight where before there was no sight. And that is the best explanation for this I have ever heard in my life. Voila, now you've got working eyes. I just created something from nothing. Now you can see. And then he tells them, go take you a little victory lap. Go get in the pool of Siloam, go wash off, and after you do that, after he does that, his sight is restored. This guy has eyes now. He can see. And then he goes home and basically just freaks out the neighborhood. All of his neighbors are like, wait, what? This can't be him. They're arguing about whether or not it's him. And they can't believe what they're witnessing. And so then, what do you do if you're a bunch of first century Jews who need an answer? You go to the Pharisees. So let's read on. John, we're going to pick up at verse 13. We're going to read down to verse 34. Let's see how this story continues and what they do from here. It says, they brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him since he has opened your eyes? He said, he is a prophet. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but how he now sees we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself. Now watch verse 22. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So for the second time they called the man who had been blind and asked and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner, referencing Jesus. He answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. They said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? And they reviled him, saying, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. Now, ironically, several weeks ago, we read people thinking he couldn't be the Messiah because they didn't know where he came from, if you remember that story from several weeks ago. But anyway, verse 30, the man answered, why, this is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, you were born in utter sin, and would you teach us? And they cast him out. My second insight for you this morning is this. No injustice will be overlooked. No injustice will be overlooked. Our persecutions are opportunities, not obstacles. That is my second insight. So, this poor guy. Can I just take a second and just really, can we just have a little sympathy for this poor guy? I still remember, because it wasn't that long ago, but I remember when I first got my glasses. I remember going in and getting these glasses, and I remember the drive home from getting these glasses. And I went most of my adult life without glasses. So imagine my surprise when it turns out that when I'm driving my car and I look out the window and I'm looking at a tree, that's not just a big green blotch attached to the branches of the tree. That's actually individual leaves. And there's actual leaves there, and there's a bunch of them. I used to think it was just a big green paint smear. But no, those are actual leaves. And I still, to this day, I was at Ted's football game the other night, and I'm sitting there something's not right. And that's better. And then all of a sudden, the game was in perfect HD. And it still amazes me how great these things work. I continue to be in awe of how amazing it is that I can see things clearly when I put these on. And all I'm comparing it to is, well, now I can still see, but it's just a little blurrier. But that's enough to amaze me thoroughly, is how quickly the shift happens. This guy's never seen anything ever. He has gone from like nothingness to all of a sudden he can see. And I have to imagine he doesn't need glasses. So he just went from nothing to seeing everything. You ever wonder, like, how would you explain eyesight to somebody who is born blind and has never seen anything in their entire life ever? You ever wonder about that? Like, how do you explain the differences in color to someone who's never seen color? Like, these are thoughts I think about when I'm bored. But he's never seen anything. And like he needs to be out there like at the park looking at the birds and the trees and the grass and touching grass, and that's what he needs to be doing. But like 5 seconds after he gets his sight, he goes home, he's like, hey everybody, they're like, it's you, and what is going on? Let's bring him to the Pharisees. He's had his eyesight for like a minute and now he's standing in front of the Pharisees. Like, that's one of the first things he gets to see is their grumpy faces, Like, now he's standing in this room and they're all like, give glory to God. What are you talking about? And they're putting him through the ringer. And we also saw in this passage that the healing itself took place on the Sabbath. So I think you know where this is going. I think you see where this is going. It's always that pesky Sabbath. So they're interrogating him now. This is like an inquisition. So we actually see 3 rounds of interrogation in this passage, if you notice. Verses 13 through 17, they interrogate him, and they don't like the way that goes. So in verses 18 through, I think it's 23, they interrogate the parents because they're trying to talk to them. They don't like the way that goes. So then in verses 24 through 34, they call him back and interrogate him a second time. It's just 3 rounds of interrogations that we just read in this passage. And notice as well, this guy's progression throughout the conversation. I love this. It starts out, he's just telling the facts. It starts out, he's just reporting what he knows. Verse 15, they ask him what happened. This is all he says. He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. That's his answer. That's it. Just the facts. I wish the so-called journalists of 2025 could do this. Just the facts. That's all he says. No interpretation, no spin. This is what happened. This is what happened. But then, as this parody of an investigation continues, you can trace throughout the conversation. You can see it happening as they keep asking him questions, and his resolve is growing, and his conviction is growing, and maybe even his frustration with the people that are asking him these questions is growing. And then his answers, if you notice, they go more and more from the factual to he really starts standing up for Jesus and giving it back to these people. You can watch his answers and you can trace this development. In verse 17, they ask him his opinion, and he says, well, he's a prophet. Did you saw that in there? In verse 17, they said he's a prophet. Now, back in verse 11, when he was talking to his neighbors, he had said Jesus was just a man. So from verse 11 to 17, Jesus has gone from a man to now he's a prophet. Notice the progression. The more times this man shares his story, and the more he has a chance to reflect on it, the more his own conviction is growing. So now he thinks Jesus is a prophet. But the Pharisees don't like the way this is going. So they call in his parents. They put him aside, they call in the parents, and they start interrogating them. And the whole point of that, and you can plainly see it in the passage, is that they're trying to discredit the testimony. Because their ultimate goal is to say that Jesus is a sinner, he's doing things he shouldn't be doing. This guy is testifying that that's not true. So do we follow the evidence? No, we're going to try to discredit the witness. So they're trying to discredit his story. He either wasn't really born blind, or he wasn't really healed, or something like that. But if they can nullify the miracle, they can nullify Jesus. And so they start interrogating the parents. And the parents, they're like, candidates for Parents of the Year. And they just basically leave their son out. They hang him out to dry. They confirm that he was born blind, and they confirm that he is their son, because that was the other question. They confirm all that, but beyond that, they don't want anything to do with this situation. So they just leave this guy to fend for himself. They're like, he's of legal age. Ask him. We want nothing to do with this. And the whole reason we see that is because they don't want to get kicked out of the synagogue. The Jews have this whole conspiracy thing going. If you say the wrong thing, you're out. And because their whole society revolved around like your participation in that synagogue and your participation with the Jewish worship system, if you got put out the synagogue, you were basically excommunicated from society. And they don't want to lose their social position. So they're like, you know what, just ask him. So they just hang him out to dry. They want nothing to do with this. They back off and they say, ask him. So then the Pharisees call the man back and they interrogate the man again. Give glory to God, they say, which is basically like, tell the truth. You know, it's like their version of an oath. Tell the truth. We know that this man is a sinner. And notice how he's starting to buck up against them. He says, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. And it's kind of hard to argue with that kind of logic. One thing I do know, now I see. So what's cute is the more they berate him, the more snarky he starts getting with them. He starts really coming at them, and actually to the point where he actually starts lecturing them on theological topics. This guy who was a beggar asking for scraps 5 seconds ago, now he starts lecturing them and giving it back to him. And in verse 27, he says something very curious. He says, do you also want to be his disciples? That word also there is kind of curious. It's kind of curious. At some point during all of this, it sure sounds like this guy is even starting to consider himself a disciple. He's starting to put himself in that position. He says, do you also? But he's holding his ground. He takes and he gives back. He takes and he gives back. And then he starts lecturing them. Like if this guy was a sinner, God would not work through him. If he was a fraud, God would not work through him. And so they're like just done. They cast him out. We're done with this. They didn't actually disprove anything he said. They just didn't like it. And so the fate that his parents were worried about happening to them when they threw him under the bus actually happens to him. He gets cast out. He just suffered an injustice. He just suffered an injustice. He was persecuted by the religious leaders. His family all but turned their backs on him. And for what? For what? For telling what he knew about Jesus. That was it. He's had his sight now for like a day. And he didn't go seeking them out. He didn't go bringing this to everybody. They called him and they asked him. And he answered their questions honestly, and now this has happened to him. So this is an injustice. But do make sure you pay attention to how his resolve and conviction only grows throughout that entire exchange. He isn't viewing his persecution as an obstacle. If he did, he would be trying to weasel out of it. No, he sees this as an opportunity. He's testifying to what he knows about Jesus. That's what he's doing. And so let me encourage you with this. If you ever for even a second suspect that you don't quote unquote know enough to talk to somebody about your faith or to talk to somebody about Jesus or to share the gospel with somebody, I don't know enough theology, I haven't been theologically trained, I don't have evangelistic training, any of this types of things, I want you to remember this man and I want you to follow his example. This man had no training of any sort, theological, evangelistic, or otherwise. In fact, he knows nothing about Jesus. Nothing but one thing. He knows one thing about Jesus. I was blind, but now I see. And that is what he is testifying. All of us can do that. So again, my second insight is that for your victory lap, no injustice will be overlooked. And these trials we face, these persecutions, they're not obstacles, they're opportunities. They're opportunities. Now let's see how the story ends as we hit verses 35 through 41. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, "Are we also blind?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say, 'We see,' your guilt remains." So, my third insight for your victory lap: our faithfulness brings rewards. Our faithfulness brings rewards. Our final victory is already secured. And if that sounds a lot like last week, it's because it's very much like last week. The Word of God is very consistent in this fact that our final victory is already secured. First thing to notice is that after everything this man went through, Jesus went to him. After everything he went through, Jesus went to him. Jesus proactively sought him out. All right, in the ESV it says when Jesus having found him. It says having found him. It's a simple little Greek participle. It's a participle of time that could more literally be rendered when Jesus found him. I mean, either translation is fine. They mean essentially the same thing, but when Jesus found him. In other words, Jesus didn't just come across him by accident. Jesus went searching for this guy. He went looking for him. He went to him. Everybody else may have abandoned this man and cast him out, but not Jesus. When everybody else abandoned him, Jesus went to him. Also note, this would be the man's first time seeing Jesus. Remember, he was blind the first time around. He's only interacted with Jesus by the sound of his voice. He's never seen his face before. His sight wasn't restored till he went and washed off in the pool. And so he came back and Jesus was gone. He's never seen him before. So this is his first time seeing him when he comes back. And so Jesus asks him if he believes in the Son of Man. And remember, the Son of Man, that's a messianic title. He's saying, do you believe in God's anointed one? Do you believe in the Messiah? And the guy says, yes. Yes, he says, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Who is he? So I can believe in him. And so he's communicating two things right there. The first thing he's communicating is that he has a desire and a willingness. He's saying, if you just point me the way, I'll do it. So he's communicating a desire and a willingness. But number two, he actually trusts Jesus to answer the question. He's trusting Jesus to point him the way. And he's saying, if you tell me who it is, I will trust you. And so he does. And so when Jesus says in verse 37, "You've seen him," get it? Because now he's seeing him for the first time. He said, well, you've seen him because he was blind, but now he does see him. And then so when Jesus self-identifies as the Messiah, when he says, "Hey, it's me," there's no more question. The guy literally says, "Lord, I believe," right there in the spot, drops to his knees and starts worshiping. He just starts worshiping on the spot. And here's another fun fact for you. This is the only time in this entire gospel where we see anybody worshiping Jesus directly. And it's right here, and it's this man. He's fully convinced now, and he fully acknowledges Jesus' divinity, and he's just worshiping. So for this guy, again, remember, just in the course of one story, Jesus has gone from being just a man to maybe he's a prophet, to maybe I'll be his disciple, to now he is divinity. Now he is the Messiah. Now I'm worshiping him. And so Jesus says in verse 39, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." And that's just another one of these Jesus statements that only makes sense when you realize how Jesus' mind works. I came into this world that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. That is a Jesus statement if I have ever heard one of those paradoxes. So Danny has this little like astronaut nightlight thing in her room. And it's like it projects stars onto the ceiling, and it's a really cool little thing, but it's each one of those little stars, and there's like a million of them. I mean, if you ever see this thing, it's not like the ones when I was a kid and it was just like a beam of light, like a flashlight. This thing projects laser beams, green laser beams. Every one of these stars is a laser beam, and they're all over the room, and you can't escape them because it's like almost a 360 projection. You cannot escape these laser beams. So when I go walk in the room at night to make sure everything's off and the radio's off and the thing's off, like you're catching a laser beam to the eye. There's no way to avoid it because they're everywhere. Like they are everywhere. So I have to walk across a room kind of like this to get close enough to it to turn it off. Because if not, I am getting shot directly in the face. I don't know how this was approved by whoever approved such things because, but I'm catching laser beams to the eye is all I'm saying. So you can't escape it. But listen, that's the funny thing about light, isn't it? It's the same light that can illuminate your path and show you the way, but that same light can also blind you. The same light that helps you see can actually blind you and drown it out so you can't see anything. Light's a funny thing like that. Light is a very funny thing. And Jesus, remember, he's the light of the world. He's been saying that. He's been saying that. He is the light of the world. So his statement here about the blind will see and those who see will become blind, this has physical and spiritual dimensions. This man, in the course of this one story, was physically and spiritually blind, and he was cured in both ways. Meanwhile, the Pharisees, who were physically able to see but spiritually blind, continue to be blinded by their spiritual blindness. And so the same light that gave sight to one is bringing about the blindness to the other. And so he says this because they can't see spiritually. And there must have been some Pharisees standing nearby when he made this comment to the man, because then the Pharisees standing nearby, they're like, hey, what do you mean? Are you saying we're blind too? Is that what you're saying? And he just very calmly tells them if they were truly blind, they might have an excuse. If they truly couldn't see the truth, they might have an excuse. But since they do see, and since they can see, and since they insist that they have sight, they have no excuse. And that's what he's telling them. You have no excuse. And there was no excuse. They had all the facts. They had all the scriptures. They had all the prophecies. They had the eyewitness testimony staring them in their face, and they rejected all of it. Every bit of it. Earlier in the story, Jesus said that the man's blindness was not caused by sin. Remember that? Verse 3? He said it was not caused by sin. Their blindness is. And that's another one of those ironies in the Gospel of John. Their blindness is and is continuing to be perpetuated by their sinfulness, their spiritual blindness. But notice how this man was cast out by the leaders, basically abandoned by his family, and yet he was not cast out or abandoned by Jesus. Neither one of those. Jesus went to him. Jesus found him. Jesus reaffirmed him. And when it was all said and done, when it was all, after everybody had cast him down and cast him out, Jesus came and he flipped it around. And he actually elevated this man, and he elevated him higher than the people who had just finished putting him down. And I need you to see that. When Jesus came through at the end, he elevated him higher than the people who had just been putting him down. And this is what Jesus will do for all of his people. At the end of the day, our faithfulness brings rewards. At the end of the day, Jesus will elevate us. At the end of the day, he will bring his rewards because our final victory is already secured. So let's put a bow on this. Jesus is not done with us any more than he was done with this man. So here's your bow. Jesus healed our blindness when he came into our lives and saved us. And now, like this man, we live in a world that is going to very often be cruel to us, be unfair to us, and subject us to ailments and injustices and all of these things, and they're going to happen. But just like this man discovered, there's going to come a day when Jesus comes back, when Jesus comes to find us. He comes back to find us, and we'll answer the same question that the man did. Do you believe in the Son of Man? He's going to come find us, and that's the question. That's the only question that's going to matter. when this day comes. And when that day comes, everything gets flipped. Everything gets flipped, just like it did for the man. We won't have to suffer these things anymore. We won't. On that day, we'll see that every ailment did, in fact, have its place. We'll see that clearly. There'll no longer be a question. It all contributed to who we became. We'll see that no injustice was overlooked. He's going to make it all right. He's going to wipe away every tear, just like Andrew read a little while ago. He's going to do all of those things. Everyone who ever suffered in his name's sake, for his name's sake, is going to be rewarded accordingly. And we'll also see that our faithfulness brings rewards. He's going to welcome us with open arms into his kingdom, where the absolute worst things we ever endured in this world, the worst thing, whatever that worst thing is, it's I was going to say it's like a distant memory, but it's less than that. It's less than a distant memory. It's not even going to be on the radar when this day comes. Because like I said last week, Jesus already won. He already won. The game's over. And if we are truly his and we're truly following his ways, we get to be on his team with him, and we win too. So if that's you, if you're on that team, if you have professed faith in Jesus, you have my permission to go home today if you get the time, and you go take yourself a victory lap, because the game's over and we've won.